Muslim women burnt their headscarves in Iran after the death of a young woman, Mahsa Amini. These images are from Karnataka, young Muslim girls demanding they be allowed to wear the hijab in the classroom. Many have come out in support of both the anti-hijab protests in Iran and the pro-hijab protests in Karnataka. These supporters are being called hypocrites. Like this tweet by Times Now's editor-in-chief Rahul Shivshankar. Like Rahul, many have been quick to compare and contrast what's happening in Iran with what's happening in Karnataka. But is it really double standards to support two contradictory protests? Joining me on this episode is writer and global communication strategist Masarat Daud, who proudly wears the hijab and supports the protests in Iran. Before I get into whether it's hypocrisy or not, let me quickly recap what's happened in Iran and in Karnataka. Protests erupted in Iran after a 22-year-old woman, Mahsa Amini, died in police custody. She had been detained by Iran's morality police for not wearing her hijab properly. In Iran, it is mandatory for women to cover their hair with a hijab and wear loose-fitting clothes to disguise their figures. Women who break the law face a public rebuke, a fine, and even arrest. Amini's death triggered protests, with women at the forefront. Some removed and waved their hijabs, several burnt it, while many others took to social media to chop off their hair. In Karnataka, earlier this year, Muslim girls were barred from entering their college classrooms because they were wearing the hijab. After protests broke out, the Karnataka government came up with a dress code in schools and colleges, banning wearing clothes that disturb equality, integrity, and public order. This order has been challenged, with Muslim girls arguing in court that wearing the hijab is a part of their faith and it is their fundamental right to do so. But the Karnataka High Court upheld the government order banning the hijab in schools and colleges. This case is now being heard at the Supreme Court. Are you a hypocrite if you support the anti-hijab protests in Iran, as well as fight for the right to wear the hijab in India? The answer is no. There are no double standards here. The end goal of these protests may be different, but the heart of the issue is the same. It is about state control and interference. It is about the choice of individuals and whether the state can curtail it. Listen into what writer and global communication strategist Masarat Daud, who wears the hijab and supports both these protests, had to say.
I think one of the things that's really important to understand here is that ultimately it is not about the hijab in itself in terms of what are the religious interpretations and so on. I think what we're up against really is looking at the state, really interfering in whatever that it is that a woman chooses. So in that way, what is happening in Iran is absolutely unfortunate. It's been going on for decades. Any kind of moral policing of a man or a woman is not okay. And for it to kind of culminate in the way that it has with the death of Mahsa is absolutely unfortunate. Everybody has the right to wear a headscarf or not. It really means nothing about a person whether they have a scarf on their head or not. So I think in every sense of the way, what is happening right is not really only about the hijab. It is really about the state imposing itself on its people. When I first saw the news coming out of Iran on this, it was not really about the hijab or the religiosity of it, which was something that really struck me. But the immediate question that I had on my mind actually was, how does a man articulate modesty if it isn't in the context of a woman, if it isn't a hijab, or if it isn't any other form of any way that a man has decided to control a woman? So how do you make men modest? Because ultimately modesty is a thing that really emanates from how do men not get triggered. So I think the conversation really needs to be changed on its head in that whole way. So that state is also a very masculine representation as well. And in what it's trying to do in the name of uniformity really is, how do you kind of again go out and exert control over women? And I think that is something we also need to reflect on.
Both these protests by women in Iran and the girls in Karnataka are about asserting their individual choice and freedoms. So, if in Iran or in India women want to wear a certain piece of clothing, it is their choice. And if they want to discard a piece of clothing, that is also their choice and their right.
Like, it is an individual person's choice. And the thing is, if you look at hijab as well, it's a very kind of it's a very fluid thing, in the sense that you will have girls at some point who choose to take it off. You'll have at some phases in their life where they'll choose to put it on. And for me, even being a Muslim, like, that's not something where if I see a friend of mine doing that, I'm not going to ask them, well, like, why are you doing that, or you shouldn't be doing that. It really is an individual's freedom. And I think we are at this stage, at this point in life, where I feel like what we choose to wear should really not be up for discussion. Let a woman choose to wear whatever it is that she wants to wear. Like, the fact that that is still a really radical notion is absolutely baffling.
Incidentally, in the Supreme Court, the Karnataka government brought up the protests in Iran to defend its order banning the hijab in schools and colleges. It argued that even in constitutionally Islamic countries like Iran, women were revolting against the hijab. But let's be clear, the government's hijab ban in schools and colleges isn't about women's empowerment.
Now, when it comes to the hijab, specifically the Karnataka issue, it is a very clear issue of really the identity markers of the Muslim community being attacked. Please, nobody be under this impression that this has anything to do with women's rights in any way, shape, or form. There is a minority of people girls who would not want to wear the hijab. Then again, you go to a place like Iran where it's enforced upon, where obviously those people do not want to wear it and are forced to wear it. We don't have a lot of that in India. And the problem in a lot of conversations I've had with people in India is somehow, like, for me, this is intellectual laziness, or it is, calling it intellectual is also really kind of giving it too much slack, but it is the absolute laziness. It is very convenient to take an identity marker of a community and just hound it and think that just because you get a scarf off a girl's head, it's going to liberate her. The laziness is that the real work to get them rights, to provide more opportunities for them, to take away the harassment that Muslims are feeling the last couple of years, very specifically, that is a lot of work, but that nobody wants to do. But then this assumption that if you're going to stop wearing a headscarf, it means that you're out there and you're liberated. Anybody who's trying to paint this Karnataka to Iran connection simply does not understand, is an absolute loss of the nuance. You have in one country the state which is taking away the right of women to wear a headscarf, to wear whatever the hell they want to wear, and then you have another country that is forcing women to wear something that they do not want to wear.
At the end of the day, whether a country is secular like India or constitutionally Islamic like Iran, what women are asking is for their choices to be respected and not politicized. So whether it is the burqa or the bikini, the decision to wear or not wear a piece of clothing should be left with a woman, not the men in her life, and not with the state.